Hello, everybody. Welcome to Subtle Asian Book Club. I'm Alexandra, also known as Twirling Pages, and I'm here with my co-host Tiffany, also known by Read by Tiffany. We're super excited to be talking about our October book of the month, which is Others Were Emeralds by Lang Leav. And we have the author here, so can you please introduce yourself and your books? And as a quick icebreaker, what was your favorite book so far this year?
Hi, I'm Lang, and this is my new book, Others Were Emeralds, which just came out a couple of months ago, and I'm so excited about it. And I'm so excited to be chatting to Alexandra and Tiffany today. My favourite book this year that I've read is Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au. It was just she's an Australian author, and it was just like this really meditative journey that she took with her mum to Japan, and they were having all these really stilted conversations, and they weren't saying very much, but there was a lot that was going on just underneath it all, and I absolutely just loved the book. It was so poetic and lovely. It's a novella, and I highly recommend it.
That's so exciting. I'll definitely add that to my TBR. Yeah, so hopefully I'll get to read it before the year ends as well. I'm going to go into some of our research and writing questions. First of all, congratulations on your debut adult novel. This is so
Thank you.
good, and I'm so glad that we picked it as our book of the month. I've been following your poetry since like 2015, 2014, when it was like
Yeah,
very popular on like Tumblr, and I
yeah.
would always see it.
Mm.
And so it's like super exciting to see your evolution as a writer. So, how was the transition from writing poetry to publishing a historical fiction coming of age novel? And also, what motivated you to make this transition?
And during the pandemic, I think for the first time, I just had time to just sit and just take stock of my life. I'd been touring nonstop for several years, and yeah, it was just really the first time I was able to just slow down and think. And I think it was just a time for me to just really go inward and just think about what I really wanted to do in life and everything. And the book just came from there. I've always wanted to tell my story, or my mom's story, and there were echoes of her in this book. And I think it was one of those books that just poured out onto the page, and it was just so intriguing and interesting, and I just had to keep following the thread. Yeah, it was just one of those things, one of those magical experiences. I'm sure a lot of writers will have gone through something similar, in that a book kind of finds you, it grips you, and you just can't help but see it through to the end.
Was the writing process for you very different when it came to writing poetry? Because I feel like sometimes people like to publish their novels in like free verse or something along those lines. Have you ever considered using like a different format for it, or did you know you wanted this narration style?
When I started writing Others Were Emeralds, I wasn't sure what it was going to be. I thought, is it going to be maybe a study in memory? And initially the book was written, everything was written out of sync. So yeah, it was all different time periods, and it was all written out of order. I don't know. I guess I just went along with it. I had wonderful editors, Alex, and my editor Sophia, from Harper Perennial, and I guess it just got to where it did in the end. I'm really, really happy with where it went. Writing it in verse, I think, it wasn't something that I considered at the time, but that doesn't mean that I'm ruling it out totally for a future work. You just absolutely never know when a book will find you, what shape it'll take. And I think that's the joy about creativity, just figuring things out as you go along.
I love the way how you described it, and it's just so reflective of life, just how like where life takes you
Yeah,
essentially. And I feel
yeah,
like that's a
absolutely.
really big theme in this book too. And for those of you who are tuning in, I feel like a lot of this book is about friendship, and we might be going into a couple of spoilers later in the end, but we'll make sure to flag it if we do. But you kind of mentioned how your mom's story also sort of inspired you. And jumping into the next question, I's background reflects your upbringing a lot, especially detailed of what's written in your author bio of how you had that immigrant experience and how you were born in a refugee camp. And this overall idea of like the immigrant experience is something I'm sure us, like our parents, many other Asian diaspora children can relate to. So could you share a little bit more about what inspired you to write this story and how that process really came about bringing it to life? Were there any specific moments in your childhood that really stood out to you?
I think when you're growing up in that environment, and it was a very multicultural environment that I grew up in, you just think it's completely normal. And you think every kid, you know, everyone's got parents that were like here as a result of war, you know, they're from war-torn countries. So you just think it's quite normal, but it's when you start reading books and when you start getting out into the world more, going to university, that you realize that you are really different and that your experiences are quite unique. And now when I look back on my life, I understand that, you know, it is very, it was a very specific time period that I went through, especially in Australia's history. We were the first wave of Asian immigrants to come in. We looked totally different to any other, you know, group of immigrants that had ever come in. And because of that, there was so much backlash. And I grew up thinking that was normal, that I wasn't welcome. I was told this isn't your country. And I think to this day, that still affects me. Oh, well, absolutely it does. I mean, you know, just even going into a clothing store or what have you and having that anxiety. So absolutely, it was an experience that I guess was something that I always wanted to write about, but I just needed, I guess, the time and the space to be able to tell the story in the way that I wanted and as authentically as possible. And that was something, I guess, I just knew when the right, I just trusted in myself that I'd know when the right moment would come along, and then it did. So it wasn't a particular moment. I guess it was just everything leading up to that point in my life.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess I was wondering, did that how did that affect your writing your poetry in the past? Like, did you ever consider like adding it into your poetry, or did you always know that you wanted to write this as a novel?
I guess for me, it has been in my poetry. I guess I've disguised it, if that makes sense. A lot of the trauma, I think, that's present even in my most, you know, earlier work, I think that was centered around my trauma, my mother's trauma, and that whole generational trauma that happens when, you know, a family goes through that kind of displacement that, you know, that my family went through. And I think that was always present, and the DNA of that was always there. But I just feel, you know, the difference with writing fiction is that you can put certain details that don't seem to fit right in a poem. You can write about incidentals, you can describe things in a way that is more vivid and is not so open to interpretation. And I guess that was the process looking back. And it was something that I absolutely always wanted to write about. I just wanted to be able to be at a stage where I felt I could do it justice, because it was just too important and I didn't want to get it wrong.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. Sorry, Tiffany, go.
I feel like, do I have a lag in my Wi-Fi? I'm afraid to jump in, but I honestly feel like you did do it justice. And as you're asking that question, I was thinking to myself, like, oh, I actually really like that the story was written in narration, because so much of, I guess to backtrack a little bit, like for the two of us, we grew up as Asian American kids, like in a very predominantly Asian community. So we didn't really we had the privilege, I guess, of not feeling like the outsider growing up. And especially for people who grow up in America, especially like even for Asian American diaspora kids, we sometimes are just like that stereotypical American lens. You forget that there are other places out there. And so for one, I thought it was really like incredible to read a story based about the Asian Australian girl, like coming of age experience, because that is so pivotal to people's upbringing too. And then the second facet to that was, I think writing this as a coming of age story, like going through what Sayi and Bridget all had to face and how they each grappled with how to deal with racism in their earlier years, really, I thought for me was a lot more powerful and very relatable to read.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think a lot of that, there was a lot of authenticity in what I was writing and what was going on during that time. So you had all the schoolyard dramas and everything going on, but then this was to the backdrop of this whole other thing that we had to deal with. And we felt like you were talking about, Tiffany, being in that community and being sheltered. In a sense, we had that when I was growing up in Cabramatta, which I named Whitlam in the book. That we had that, but the moment that you step out of that, it was you were going to get some kind of altercation, like it was something that you just accepted as part of life, like something would happen, or you'd get called a name, or you'd get a shove, or so it was just so incredibly common at the time. But yeah, so it's really interesting to hear your perspectives as well of what it was like. And it was, I think if we had to stayed in that immediate community, it was it would have been a lot easier to avoid a lot of the racism, but at the same time we had our own problems in that community as well, just because there were problems with crime and with gangs. So it was we were dealing with quite a lot at the time.
Yeah, that must have been really challenging to experience, but also I feel like it also must have been really, really challenging to kind of grapple with that and then like write that into your story. And there is a lot of, or not a lot, but a good amount of like anti-Asian sentiment in your book that describes all the characters' experiences. So I guess my question is like, how did you go about researching and approaching the historical and cultural aspects during this time period, maybe beyond your personal trauma and experience during that time?
That's such an interesting question, because when I started writing this book and I felt that it was going to be a manuscript and I was going to get it to a first draft, it was during the pandemic, and I remember writing to the State Library and I said, look, I'd love to come over and, have you got archives on microfiche of the newspapers, so I can kind of, get a look into what was going on at that time, to contrast it with my memories. And we were just chatting back and forth, and we said, oh, well, maybe I can come over soon. Hopefully this pandemic will be over. But I ended up finishing the book before it was over. So I really relied on research on the internet, talking to my friends from the time, and just on my own memories. And I'm kind of glad in a way that I wasn't able to do that research, because I think it could have been a different book. And I really love the way the book feels like it's like a memory, and it's quite reflective, and it feels a little bit like fragile in that way, in the way memory is. And I was really happy in the end with that.
Yeah. I felt that as a reader when I was reading it and experiencing it. It really did feel like you're going with I and like really experiencing her almost like nostalgia and like her like memories and like experiencing that with her. So I really did feel that as a reader.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad.
So as we sort of mentioned, a major theme in this novel is friendships, most notably Ai's female friendships with other Asian women, each of whom brings something different to her life. So we wanted to ask, like, how have your friendships with the Asian women in your life impacted your life as well as your writing?
Well, I think you form a lot of friendships when you're young, and they're the friendships that you keep throughout. And they're the most precious ones, because these are the friends that know you. And recently we just had like a get together after, because I was in Sydney where I grew up, and after my book signing, we all just went out to hang out at my hotel, and it was just so much fun. We all got to caught up together for the first time in a long time. We got some pizza, and we were just talking about Cabramatta, and then because we've all gone our separate ways, and we're all doing different things, and their partners are always saying, oh, you talk about Cabramatta so much. And my partner says that to me as well. And we do. It's almost like, it's like a trauma thing, but also we loved growing up where we did. And we have wonderful memories there. And that's really hard to describe to someone that, for all its faults, like, I couldn't imagine growing up anywhere else. I guess we were just so authentic. We were so real, and we didn't really have these chips on our shoulders. It was just, we were just being kids. And it was such a multicultural place to grow up. So absolutely, my friendships, and I'm so grateful to have these friendships, and they absolutely, I think your writing is created by the relationships that you have in your life. And yeah, they're very, very precious to me.
That was so beautiful.
I know.
And like, well said. I feel like so emotional, especially because Tiffany and I are also like childhood friends, and I feel like whenever all of our friends like get together, we also do talk about home a lot. And I get like, right now I'm feeling particularly homesick after what you just shared. So thank you for that.
I feel all warm and fuzzy
definitely.
inside.
Yeah, it's the best.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna pivot into some plot and character questions and go more into the book itself. And I think this is like a safe time to say that we will talk about spoilers, right? So I guess if you haven't read the book, then you should definitely go read the book and then come back and watch the rest of this interview. But throughout the novel, we follow Ai's worries and uncertainty about her trust and friendship with Bridget, Sighing, Bowie, and Tin. And we see her flip back and forth between rationalize what she thinks is the truth. And I guess my question is like, what do you hope to convey about the nature of friendships and the roles friends play in shaping our identities and life paths?
Well, I think it's just, you know, going back to relationships in your life, I think it's the quality of your relationships, and they can really, really determine your life, because I think you can only really know yourself by the people around you. And the point where she's 17 and she's impressionable and she's just still figuring things out. She's figuring herself out. She's learning her boundaries. And she's just essentially learning how to be a person. And I guess, you know, you guys would remember what it was like at that time, and really just trying to rely on, you know, your sense of what is the truth, and to try to gather that information. And through Ai's eyes, as her as the protagonist, I guess things were twisted by those around her. Sighing, going into spoilers now. Her relationship with Sighing really kind of poisoned the well, and I think we all have had that one girl, Sighing, in our life who has done exactly that. And she was just the character that came out, and she's actually one of my favorite characters that I've ever written, because she's so layered and complex and an interesting character. So I hope that answered the question. I sort of lost track of what the question was. But just going into characters, Sighing was definitely really interesting.
That's so interesting that you say that Sighing was your favorite character, right? Because I would have assumed like maybe Bridget or Tim.
Oh, I love Bridget. I love them all, but I just feel Sighing had a complexity to her. She was really interesting, and initially she wasn't even meant to be a major character, and I think characters do this in books. They kind of start vying for the spotlight, and that's just something that naturally happens, and because of that, the plot goes on like a different track, and it usually makes the book a lot more complex and interesting.
Or I guess my follow-up for you sharing that Sighing was your favorite character to write, who was the most challenging to write?
The most challenging, I found Tin kind of challenging, just because he was very quiet. So I think there was a hesitancy, and I've read some reviews where people are like, oh, you know, I wish we'd seen more of Tin. And, you know, if I could go back in time, then maybe I'd put Tin a little bit more in there. But he was probably the hardest for me to write.
definitely one of my personal favorite characters, but I did have many favorites in
Sweet.
this book. I thought it was interesting how you said, well, I have heard before that from some authors that like side characters you never expect like end up vying for the spotlight. And I feel like
Yeah,
just
it's
Saying's
weird.
character and how you mentioned that we all have a Saying in our lives. It feels
Yeah.
also really reflective of that age when you have so much doubt and insecurity and you're like questioning your friendships and questioning yourself and the people around you.
Yeah.
And it's just very real.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So through Ai's story, we experience her first love with Bowie and as well as her future love with Tin. Could you share your journey of shaping their characters and relationships? Did you go into this sort of knowing the end result, like what relationships end up coming out of the story?
Oh, that was like really strange actually, because I wrote the prologue, and the prologue it just poured out, and it has pretty much remained intact. Like there wasn't much through all the edits. The prologue has remained intact, and Tin was in the prologue, and then I wrote the first scene. When they're walking, and I does the graffiti in the cement, the wet cement, which is something I've done before once. So I just wrote that memory in. I thought it was like a funny thing. Anyway, so she wrote that in, and I really thought the name would have been Tin, but a different name came out. So then that created the dynamic there, and I think right from the start that was a thing. Between the two, and that's where the story started out, because I know there are some authors that and I'm so jealous of them, that they can actually just write an outline and plot everything, and basically plot this chapter. In this chapter, this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and then they have the ending. But that's not the way I write. Like I'm very intuitive, and I sort of like I'm very much led by the characters. As we mentioned before, that Saying popped in, and she really just took over in some ways. So that relationship dynamic was set up right at the start, and it was a very instinctive thing.
Wait, okay. Big spoiler question, which is like the big thing in the middle. Did you, I guess, because I'm very curious, like, did you always know that this whole jet ski accident was going to happen, or was this something you had or like, was this something that sort of just came to you because you realized I needed this like big change in her life? That's a poor way to put it, but like, yeah.
Yeah. The jet ski happened very early on as well. And I think for me, the jet ski was something that I'd always wanted to write, because I actually saw a jet ski accident one time at camp, and it wasn't fatal at all. But it wasn't too serious. But I just remember, it was in a lake, and again, memory is just so weird. And totally unreliable. But it was at camp, and there were these two guys on a jet ski, and there was a crash. And I remember the sound of the crash. And I suppose that's always been in my mind. And I've always wanted to ride a jet ski. And in most of my books, there's always an accident. My previous YA novels, there's an accident in both of them. I don't know. It's just something that I guess I didn't consciously think, well, I have to write this in so that this can happen. Because when I was writing it, I didn't know what the jet ski was going to be. And for me, initially, it wasn't even, it was just going to be an accident. I didn't have the men come into it. But then as the story progressed, I just felt that was a natural thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like it definitely like really changed the tone or the direction as I was reading, because I was like, oh, like where's the story going to go? And it was like, boom.
Yeah.
No, I was so confused because I was like
sorry.
shocked. Oh, not in a negative way. I was just like, I think I was processing it in the same way that I was. Because for I guess like the following chapters immediately, she was like having trouble processing it, and I was feeling the same way. I was like, oh, like did this really happen? And so I felt like you did a really, really good job of like portraying like how like trauma and grief and all of those things can affect someone. And then like for the remaining of the book, mental health is a really big theme, as like I is like struggling to reconcile with everything that has happened to her. And so kind of pivoting into the next question, like I mentioned, like mental health is a big thing either in the accident or also overall through the refugee experience, and like they're all major themes throughout the book. Did you know that you wanted to explore these topics, or again, like did they kind of come to you through the writing process? And like also, how did you go about approaching and balancing these heavy themes?
Well, that's the thing. It's you know, when you're writing about really heavy stuff, it does take a lot out of you. And I think the way to do it is to contrast that with light. And it's a delicate balance. And I think it takes a while to get the hang of it, because a lot of stuff can get to you. And especially since I was delving so much into my memories. And, you know, we had such a strict lockdown here, so I wasn't able to visit home. You know, for a long time, and I couldn't see my family. I think a lot of that played into it as well. And I think when something is forcibly taken away from you, because before that I was able to just hop on a plane. It's about a 2.5-hour flight, and I was able to see them pretty regularly, which was nice. But having that distance, your dreams start to get more vivid of the past. You start to become really nostalgic. And also as well, with the pandemic, I was going into my 40s. And that was just such a huge milestone for me in terms of age and, you know, coming to this point of maturity. I think all of that had played into it, and all the emotions I was feeling at that time. And I was also channeling a lot of the feelings that I felt. I dealing with the grief of what had happened. And I did, in a way, because there was sort of a discussion of should we make it more obvious what had happened. But I did want to leave the readers with this kind of baffled sense of, did it happen? Was it a dream? Are they still there? And because they were still very much, Bowie and Bridget were still very much present in I's life. And that's what she was finding it hard to grapple with, that everything, the world had moved on, but, you know, these two people that she loved very dearly weren't there. And also contrasting her love of Bridget with Bowie, and almost in an unfair way pitting one love against another. And that is something, I guess, that people are judged for doing, you know, in the world in general. Why are you grieving over this loss more than that loss? And it's a really weird thing that humans do to each other. So these were all the things that I wanted to explore.
I thought you just, I don't know, after you say that, I was like, well, I feel like you've done it all very, very well. Because as I was reading this book, I feel like I was listening to the audiobook, and I just like felt like I was like with I as she was going through so many of these intense emotions. And I would like listen, and I would have to just like stop. I was like, wait, I need a second to process everything, because that was so much, and I feel for her. Especially when she was going through, like, I think one moment where I felt like she finally was able to breathe was when she was like, Tin was also someone who went through this like travesty as well, and she had Tin who she could try to talk to and write her letter to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the relationship between her and Tin, they were, you know, there was this part where I wrote that he was like, it felt like he was the only other person left in the world for her, but he could have been on the moon. And I think it was that disjointedness she had with him, and they both had to get over this, almost this shyness in that they cared for each other very deeply, and that was very obvious. But, you know, at that age when you're young, it's like not really having the skills to be able to articulate your thoughts or to do so in a way that you're comfortable. And that they were, you know, some of the nuanced emotions that you experience at that age that I wanted to write and get across. So I was really channeling my younger self and thinking about what it was like during that time.
Yeah. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, the book did feel like very nostalgic, and I really felt that I was experiencing all this with her. And in a way, I also felt like I was experiencing my younger self, even though my life experiences are way different from I. But I really like related to her and like all of her emotions.
I think even with
I
the
think,
female.
oh, sorry, Tiffany.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
sorry,
no.
go on, Tiffany. No,
I
no, no,
was
you go,
saying,
you go.
I was saying, like, even with the female friendships, like, that was something,
Mm-hmm.
like, the
Mm.
dynamic between her versus Saying versus Bridget, like,
Yeah,
that felt
yeah,
very present in terms of, like, your younger middle school, like, high school days of, like,
yeah,
trying to figure out who your
absolutely.
real friends are and
Mm.
wanting to
Yeah,
have those true friendships, but not knowing.
yeah, absolutely. It's those bonds that you form when you're young, and they're just so strong. And I think that they will always be with you. And you can, even if you grow apart or you're doing different things, as soon as you see each other when you're on the phone, it's almost like no time has gone by, and they just understand you in such a such a deep and profound way, in a way that can never be replicated. And I think female friendships are very interesting, and there's so much ground there. And I mean, there are a lot of fantastic books about female friendships, but it's something that I'm endlessly fascinated with. I think oftentimes they can be pitted against like relationships, or they can take a backseat to romantic relationships. But I think they're just as for a woman, they're just as profound and important.
Yes, I feel the same way. I love female friendship books.
Yeah.
So that was like one of the reasons why I really love this one, because you did a great job at like balancing the friendships and also her romantic relationships, and also like
Yeah.
the undertones of grief and how she's like processing her trauma, and also like racism. And you did a very good job at balancing it all.
Thank you.
So I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, so kind of pivoting into different approaches for responding to trauma and racism, specifically through friendships. So one thing that was really interesting for me was that Sighing and Bridget have different perspectives on how Asian diaspora should present themselves or fight back against racism in immigrant
Yeah.
populations. So while there may not be a right answer for how people should respond to racism or confront it, why was it important for you to portray these polar approaches?
Like you said, there's no right answer when it comes to racism and to responding to them. And I think my friends and I, when we were about, I think, 15, 16-ish, similar ages to them, there was this politician named Pauline Hanson, and she gave her maiden speech to Parliament. And she said, "I feel we are in danger of being swamped by Asians." And overnight, it was just this, hatred. And it's hard to describe unless you've lived through that time. But I was talking to a lovely journalist about it recently, and she grew up in Australia as well. And she said that she was in class that day because she was in a white neighborhood, and there was a show on television, and they were asking a quiz of should we send all Asians back home. And it was overwhelmingly, and you had to call in, and it was overwhelmingly yes. And the teacher brought it up the next day and said, "Oh, did you see, did you see that questionnaire? And who answered yes?" And she said every single hand in the room shot up. And then this girl was like, "Oh, my mom called 10 times." So there was that, overwhelming sense of being unwelcomed. So at the time we were, I guess to combat it, I joined this organization, and it was like we had this racism day, and me and some of my friends, we had to go to this, I think it was called Cooperation Day or something along those lines, but I still have the t-shirt from it, where a lot of the schools all gathered together, and we all had to make speeches and everything. And I remember we stood up and said, "We're from Cabramatta High." And then there was like this, oh my God, because it was such a notorious school at the time. We were always on the news, and it wasn't as bad as what everyone was making it out to be. So we did things like that. And we were talking, like, just like I and a group of friends, we were talking about how do we get people to see us like human beings and what have you. We sort of did leaflets and little things like that, ways that, you know, we could cope with what was going on, or felt like, you know, we were in some way in control, because the fact was we were scared. We actually didn't realize that, you know, they couldn't kick us out of the country. Not when the same thing happened to my family. And these were some of the things that were sort of going on in my mind as a teenager, and that I wanted to portray in the book in the most authentic way that I knew possible. Yeah, but like you said, Alexandra, there's no right or wrong when it comes to, I guess, you know, being an activist and supporting a cause. Everyone has their own way, and I think it's respecting people's different ways of approaching things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can't believe it, but like, I can't believe that was allowed to happen.
Yeah, I know, and that's just one example. I mean, it was really, really crazy. I mean, if you go onto YouTube and you look up, you know, racism in Australia, you'll find plenty of material.
Yeah. I'm just like still in shock, because I feel like racism still definitely exists against like the Asian American community, Asian Australian community.
Yeah,
but
it does.
The way that people have gone about doing things has grown so much, and just, I guess, like, that's just a stark and like explicit thing that like I personally have never faced. So it's just so mind-boggling to hear and imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, to add on to that, like, I think like what shocks me more is that it's so recent. Like, it's in the 90s, which is really like not that long ago.
No. Yeah. It's going back like 20 or so years. So yeah, it's not too long ago. And it's kind of great that, you know, that my generation has grown up, and there are some really fantastic authors who are writing about it, like Tracy Lynn. She wrote a book about Cabramatta, which was really great. Yeah, so it's just really interesting just seeing fiction come out of, you know, that whole Western Sydney and yeah, that whole time. Yeah, it's just been really great to see.
Wait, I had a question. I guess like this is, I don't know if this is a very serious question, but I was wondering like what prompted you to change the name of the city or like the town to Whitman versus the actual town that you grew up in, which is Cabramatta?
Yeah, initially I did have Cabramatta, but like I mentioned earlier with my girlfriends, Cabramatta is such a loaded word. Like it's one of those things where you can't explain unless you're from there. And I felt that it was just distracting me way too much. Just seeing it, there's this like, you know, really emotional response that you get. So I thought I'd change it to Whitlam, just because there was a Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, who had lived there. And there was talk for a while, like we were going to change our school to Whitlam High. And there was talk about maybe possibly changing, you know, Cabramatta to Whitlam. And our library is called the Whitlam Library. And that's where I hung out a lot, you know, when I was a kid. So I just felt that Whitlam was less confronting for me. And that's the only reason why. And I did think about, you know, now I've written this book, maybe I can go back and change Whitlam to Cabramatta. But I don't know, it's really strange when you give a name to something in a book, it becomes what it is. And it kind of sticks, and changing it just changes the book, the flow of the book. But it could be just a superstitious thing. But yeah, that's exactly what happened, and my thought process that went through it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So throughout the story, we explore the experience of the characters' immigrant parents and their impact on their children's lives. It's a big part of the whole project that Bridget and Saying are undertaking. I and her friends lead seemingly ordinary lives despite their parents, like in contrast to their parents, like more harrowing immigrant experience past. So what do you hope readers will take away from these intergenerational dynamics? Because I'm sure that like for us, we relate more to the kids, but some people may relate to like different characters in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think language is probably the thing that was the most difficult. I always wish that I could have nuanced conversations with my parents, the way that I can speak to my stepson, like we can share memes and, you know, just laugh about things or talk on a deeper level. I wish I had that relationship with my parents, that I can talk to them about all these complex ideas that I am thinking, but I can't because our language is just so basic. And I can only probably communicate with them on a kind of like a, I don't know, 5-6-year-old level. It's hard to explain. I don't know how you guys are with communicating with your parents, because they taught me teacher, and I'm just really, my teacher is just really, really terrible. So I think language is probably the biggest barrier, and it's the hardest leap to make, you know, when something is intergenerational and they've come from a different world and they've settled in this completely alien world, and they're just trying to do the best that they can. And I guess their bridge into this new world is their children. And that's a huge responsibility to bear. And I think some parents were worse than others. I was really lucky with my parents, but I know that pressure got a lot for some of my friends.
Do you feel like writing this book has allowed you to become closer to your parents in a way?
Oh, absolutely. I think, you know, I talk to them about their stories a lot more, because it's so strange going back to the language barrier. Things get lost in translation. It's really, really crazy. And a lot of things that you know about your parents are things that you kind of overhear them telling other people. It's almost as though there's like a disconnect, and it's always there no matter what. But yes, I dedicated my book to my parents, and they came to my signing in Australia, which was such a wonderful thing, and my brother as well. It was just so lovely to have them there. And I definitely feel that, you know, now the pandemic is semi-over, that I can see them a lot, visited each other, and it's just been really lovely.
Sorry,
So
I have another question off of that. As you were saying these things, I was reminded of a lot of the stories that, like Tim's mom, not Science mom, like I's mom, like all the stories that they share with the fish, and was it a mango?
The mango, yeah.
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 Based off of real life, of like your parents or like your parents?
The fish, definitely. That was my mum. So that was pretty much told verbatim. So our family's life was saved by a fish. That's a true story. And also the mango, my dad, we were, you know, starving, and my dad shot a mango out of a tree with a slingshot. So that definitely happened as well. So these are just stories that I was able to interweave into the narrative. And most of them, I'd say probably all of them are true, or have some truth in them.
Yeah, they're just so powerful to read, and I'm glad they made their way into the novel.
Yeah, me too. Same.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I had a question about I's like transition into her college, or like her art school or university. I feel like a lot of times when in any, or not any, but I would say like most first year university students are struggling a lot with like feeling like isolated because it's a new environment. But then I think especially for I, because she was like moving away from home, and then like right before she moved away from home, Bridget's mom like moved to a different town, and then also like her closest friends like passed away. So I feel like I, as a character during that time, was very like isolated. I guess like my question was, did you always, or like kind of like, did you intend to have her specifically feel like isolated because she was like, she didn't have any of the support that she had in the first half of the book, either be it her friends or her family or her environment?
I guess I just wanted to put her in a place where, because she hadn't really dealt with what had happened, I think she was just she was putting it to one side, and it was probably just too much for her. So she was in a sense still in denial. So I guess with, you know, when she got into uni and she was working on the dress, in a way she was forced to confront it in a strange way, just because Bridget came back to her, and she was always present, but then she just came back with a force that I couldn't ignore. And I suppose I just wanted her to get in touch with that part of herself through that project. And I think she can only really do it in like a state of isolation, if that makes sense. And I think it was making that dress was very therapeutic for her in some respects. In others, it it brought on a lot of her demons and things that she hadn't really reconciled about her past. And it also brought her back to Whitlam as well, and it brought her face to face with her trauma and forced her to just make amends with it.
Yeah.
So one more question that we have before we jump into like a speed round of questions and begin to wrap things up is, what inspired you to write this title? Did you pick it, or was it like something your editors picked for you? We like it really
it's just you guys might have missed it. It's just a line in the book where I's just she's kind of looking at herself, and she's wondering why she's putting so much emphasis on these relationships, and then she just thinks to herself, these thoughts are just coming to the surface, like these epiphanies one after another, and some were like some of the stones were like precious stones, some were semi-precious and others were emeralds, and I just felt that it was really befitting of the title. It was befitting as the title, just because I don't know. I always felt like the other growing up. I just remember that there is a poignant scene in the book where, as a little girl, she's they're celebrating the 200 years since colonization, and she's a fairy, and a grown man spits on her, and she's an 8-year-old girl. Which is taken from a real memory as well, which was I was able to just read that verbatim. And when you look at, Sydney Harbour, I don't know if you guys have ever been there. It's so gorgeous. It's like a jewel. And Sydney is often referred to as the Emerald City. So I guess, others were emeralds. It always felt like Sydney, as much as I loved it and have like very complex feelings toward it, I never felt that I was an emerald or that it belonged to me. So the title seemed to fit. On that level as well.
That's so beautiful. And very, very fitting. Well, thank you for indulging in all of our questions. We have a few more kind of like fun and quick ones, so I'll ask them, and hopefully you'll be able to answer quickly, but some of them may be a bit challenging. The first is, what is your most anticipated 2024 release?
There's an author named Miranda July who I really love. She wrote this amazing short story, and she's got a book coming out in 2024, I think. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay. Well, add it to my list. Is there a book that you would recommend to everybody?
Pure and Easy by Susanna Clark. It's just a very gorgeous book. It'll be like unlike any book you've read. It's just so unique and gorgeous and beguiling.
Okay. Is there an Asian, Australian, or New Zealand book that you would recommend?
Oh God, I don't know the title, sorry, but it's by Tracy Lynn, and I think it's called Everything I Never Told You, possibly. But it's by Tracy Lynn, and she's a Australian Asian author, and the book was really fantastic.
Amazing.
Adding it to our TBR. And then the last one is your favorite Asian food or your favorite food in general.
Favorite Asian food, probably congee. It's my comfort food. So I've learned how to make it since I moved away from home, which was 13 years ago. So that's probably my favorite comfort food. In terms of favorite food, I don't know, pizza, I guess.
It's got the good memories of being with your girlfriends too.
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. Yeah, I love margarita pizzas.
Oh, yes. So as we begin to wrap things up, we're really wanting to know, are you working on anything new right now? And what can fans of yours expect in the future?
Yes, I'm halfway through my next novel. It's set in the sort of later 2000s, when social media is just starting to come in. which was a really, really interesting time. And I think in many ways similar to now with AI coming in, because, back then there was Photoshop and, the whole post-truth, era. And I'm writing about a group of women, and they're in their late 20s to early 30s. And, they've got very messy lives, messy relationships. And it's kind of like, got all the drama and suspense of Others Were Emeralds and possibly more.
Ooh, no. If it's going to be as heartbreaking as Others Were Emeralds, I'm preparing myself too.
Oh, thank you. I can't wait for you to read it.
Very excited. So last question. What do you hope for readers? I guess it's two questions, but what do you hope for readers to get out of your stories? And do you have any lasting messages for them?
I guess, it's a hard question. It's always a difficult question for me. I guess I just want them to take away, because everyone sees something different in a book, and I guess for them to just, maybe take away from my experiences and learn a little bit about what it was like for my generation to grow up in Australia during a very strange time in Australia's history. And I'm obviously very, very grateful to all my readers. I feel absolutely blessed, and a lot of my readers are aspiring writers as well. So I wish them all the very best.
Incredible. I'm personally really glad I read this book. I thought I learned a lot out of it, just understanding more about Australia and the Asian Australian experience. So it's very eye-opening and a rewarding read. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. It was such a lovely chat. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Super excited to see all that you write in the future. For those of you tuning in, our November book of the month is The House of Doors. We'll have more information shared on our social media and Discord. But otherwise, we hope to see you next time. And thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.